to a banking conference once and had a panel, and there were a lot of distinguished professors and doctors of philosophy who were talking about how these forms of cryptocurrency have none of the characteristics of money and don't work as money and therefore are not money. And my simple suggestion at that panel was, well, I'm staying in a hotel that I paid for with cryptocurrency. I flew to this conference on a plane that somehow I managed to get a ticket for cryptocurrency. So as far as I'm concerned, the thing that allows me to fly in a giant metal bird in the sky at 500 miles an hour pretty much feels like money to me. So you can tell me through all of your years of professional experience and, deep academic accreditation and credentialing that what I'm doing isn't real, but I'm still doing it. The very experience that I have contradicts that. And anecdotes don't make for science, but money isn't a tangible thing. Money, as you said before, is a fiction that we all participate in. And apparently some other people were participating in my fiction because they sold me a ticket to a plane.
That's amazing. Did you have to negotiate that, or how did that work
No.
out?
There's plenty of companies out there who will happily take crypto to sell you a plane ticket or a hotel room or something like that. There's plenty of companies. Oh, at the moment they're intermediaries because usually the airlines or the hotels don't take crypto directly, but that doesn't really matter. It's no different than me, paying something through Visa with Visa as the intermediary.
Amazing. And speaking of fear, so you're talking about some people fear this.
Yes.
When I I always like to use my grandma Suzie just to
Yes.
break things down in the most simple ways.
Hi, Suzie.
Hi, Suzie. How you doing? And so what if my grandma Suzie was in the room and she would say, Andreas, I hear a lot about Bitcoin. And speaking of which, the Google Trends compared to the adoption in terms of wallets, there's a huge gap of people who know, aware, but do not use cryptocurrency. Yeah. What is that fear coming from? And if you had to explain to my grandma Suzie that she shouldn't fear Bitcoin, for instance, or cryptocurrency, like how would you approach someone in a simple way?
The first question I would ask is, realistically, does your grandmother need this technology? And most likely the answer is no.
No. Yeah.
And that's okay, right? This isn't for everyone. Not everybody needs this technology. If your grandmother lives in a country where there's financial stability, where institutions are relatively reliable, where governments are not totalitarian, where the currency is not hyperinflating, leave Suzie alone.
Leave Suzie alone.
She's enjoying her retirement.
Suzie.
Let her enjoy her retirement. She doesn't have to learn yet another new thing.
Don't worry, Grandma.
It's it's okay. We shouldn't try to push this on people who don't need it. Now, if someone needs it and they're interested in learning more, I think it's important to start with some of the fundamentals of what money is, right? And that's actually even more important to do with children than the elderly, because they're going to be in a world where they need to understand the fundamentals of how money works and finance. These are really important lessons to teach your children, right? Or as I like to say, have the conversation about the birds and the bees, and then have the conversation about the private keys. You have to have a conversation about control, about finance, about responsibility, but you also have a conversation about what it means to be a citizen or participant in the 21st century economy. And that's going to look very different, right? So depending on who you're talking to, what their perspective is, what their need is, you have a different conversation. It's important to be able to speak in terms that are relevant to the people who are going to be using this. And, I don't know what that means, but don't worry. If people need it, they're going to come and ask you. You don't need to tell them what to do. I think it's also a mistake to do that because it's a bit off-putting, right? We've annoyed the hell out of everybody we've ever gone to a party with. It's like, you've been talking about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency for the past 2 hours. Leave me alone. I want to have a drink and enjoy some dancing, right?
I remember a part of your interview in the London Reel, which I watched live the other day, and you were saying that I wouldn't recommend it to my dad, actually. It's similar to what you're saying now.
My dad would lose the keys. He'd get I monitor my dad's accounts because what happens is, like many of our parents, he'll have a problem with his laptop, his tablet, his phone. He'll take it to a service place, and they'll go in order to access his account, they'll change the password. And they'll change the password to his date of birth or some stupid password like that. And I get the notification that the password has changed. And I call my dad. I'm like, did you get the password changed? I'm like, no, the lovely, helpful people at the local mega store changed my password.
Oh, no.
Okay, here's how you change it back. Usually within a few hours, I've got it fixed again. But, 6 months later, that happens again. My dad will take his Bitcoin wallet to the local friendly people at the mega store and say, help me, I can't, this is my mnemonic phrase. I'm having some difficulty typing it in. And they'll be like, don't worry, we'll help you. Boom. And it's gone.
And it's...
We're not ready for that yet. And that's okay. It took me a good decade to get my dad to use email and help him understand it. And now he loves it. But his security practices are terrible. And I can't help with that.
That makes a lot of sense. I think now that you mentioned that, I don't think I would actually recommend it to my grandma, Suzie. I just say you're in a safe area for now. If you want Bitcoin, I'll store some for you and maybe one day.
Yeah. Sometimes it's important. Like, talk to your grandma, Suzie, about what money was like and what banking was like, decades ago. You can learn more from her than teach her about cryptocurrency. Have her teach you about banking. Have her teach you about the Great Depression, right? Have her teach you about, the fear that can cause. That's what I learned. My father taught me about the Nazi occupation of Greece. He taught me about the dictatorship and the civil war that happened afterwards. That's what I learned, and it influenced my talking and my perspective and my political life since I was a child, because those experiences are very powerful. The problem is when we forget the lessons that a previous generation has learned. Don't teach your grandma anything. Sit down, ask her to tell you your story, record it, and learn something from her.
That's really good advice. And speaking of depression, a lot of people kind of speculate on how we might enter another financial crisis. As you know, of course, Bitcoin was kind of born thanks to the previous one, right? Mm-hmm. And that previous one was triggered, obviously, by the private sector. But this one could be triggered by the public sector. Or both.
Yes.
With the federal banks and QE and all these ideas that may hurt us in the long term. I know that you don't have a magic ball and you cannot see the future, but will this help Bitcoin, or will it hurt Bitcoin as a safe haven, as something that we can...
It's impossible to tell. In fact, I think I object to some of the attitude that pervades the open blockchain community that, bring on the recession. I've got a life raft, and I'm going to be standing in my life raft laughing at all of the people drowning around me who didn't get the message of crypto. You have to be a sociopath to have an attitude like that. If we do have a worldwide recession, or even a localized recession, a lot of good, innocent people are going to get hurt. And they're going to get hurt not because they did something bad, but because they didn't learn an important lesson, right? And that's not their fault. And we should be more empathetic to the impact that has on other people's lives. So the idea that I'll be rich while the others are starving, that's not a healthy attitude to have as a human being. Let's hope we don't have a global recession. Let's instead hope that we can gradually normalize the economic systems with help from cryptocurrency, but also with better politics and better civic participation and all of the other things we can do in the world. Because if we just wait for the rest to collapse so they can help crypto, first of all, it might not. Like at the moment, if we have a recession, not only can we not help all of the people who will need help because cryptocurrency can't scale like that, and it's not ready technologically or from a user experience or security perspective. But also, right now, the sector benefits inadvertently and very ironically from the quantitative easing. It benefits from the fact that investors are putting money into a number of different technologies because the yields on traditional investments are already topped out. So they're trying to find other places to invest their money, and we benefit because that fuels research and development and training and software engineering and all of the growth in our space. Like that would dry up immediately, and we shouldn't be gleeful about that. So I can't make predictions about what will happen. I certainly don't wish a global recession. I think that's very dangerous thinking.
It's a very dangerous thing. That's the first time I heard this angle, and I think it's a really interesting one. Obviously, it's something that many people debate, but as you said, it as long as it has a negative impact
we need to
on
talk
social,
about it.
Yeah, we need to talk about it.
We need to debate it. We need to warn people that we're on a path that is very dangerous. Our financial system is more fragile than it was in 2008. And part of the reason it's more fragile is because none of the fundamental structural problems were fixed. And instead, we just kind of papered over them with just printing a lot of currency and bailing out a lot of institutions that should have failed and letting people get away with things for which they should have gone to jail. And that's going to come back and bite us, right? Now, later, in a big way or a small way, it will. We are going to pay the price for this. The question is, as a society, do we learn that lesson? Can we apply that lesson? Can we improve our systems and make them more robust and less fragile, and more resilient? And as individuals, can we make individual choices that diversify us and reduce our exposure to systemic risk and single point risk, so that we have a more healthy financial future? There's individual responsibility, and there's also, the societal responsibility and our participation in society. We have to talk about these things. We have to talk about it. But talking about them and wishing for them is two very different things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, I kind of see you, if there is an actual crisis triggered by the public sector, like you fill rooms like today, the room was absolutely full. I feel like you would have 10 times more people listening because they've been deceived twice, or at least get more interest by...
I mean, honestly, that's a terrible way for me to get my work done.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly, my life would become extremely insecure. It's already difficult to do this job with the security threats that exist. But if we had that kind of thing going on, and desperate people are dangerous people, and I would be in a position where my safety would be much, much more fragile.
Oh, I see. One question.
No, not wishing her.
Not wishing,
not at all.
Yeah, okay. Pray. And one last question that I wanted to ask you was related to, obviously a big topic these days is the Facebook token.
Coin.
The coin, the global coin.
Yeah, Zuckbucks.
Yes. And a lot of people are debating, from what I've seen up to now, is will this benefit Bitcoin, as in create more awareness for cryptocurrency? Will it hurt Bitcoin? Some people, there's one author on Forbes that mentioned that Facebook or the global coin will completely take over Bitcoin. Some crazy things that have been said, but the pros and cons, if you don't mind breaking down on how this affects Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, that would be amazing.
Yeah, so I think, again, and we hear this a lot, is how do you evaluate the fundamental differences between something like global coin, I believe they're going to call it. We jokingly call it Zuckbucks, but global coin, I think, is the name they're talking about, which is ironic because it's not global and it's not a coin. The problem is that if we evaluate it using the principles we talked about before, the 5 pillars.
The 5 pillars, yeah.
Is it open? No. It's not open. It can't be open. Participants will have to be identified and vetted. Why? Because Facebook is a centralized organization that exists under different jurisdictions, primarily the US jurisdiction, but also many others. And in those jurisdictions, they're obligated by law, if they extend financial services to individuals, to do what's known as Know Your Customer. And Know Your Customer regulations require them to directly identify and vet every participant in every transaction, both sides of the transaction. That means that it's not open. Is it borderless? No, they have to comply with sanctions and embargoes and border controls and export controls and currency regulations. It cannot be borderless. It will serve a few countries, just like PayPal can only serve a few countries. It cannot be neutral because source and destination, they are obligated by law of not only verifying but preventing certain transactions. They must not only prevent transactions to certain people and from certain people, or organizations under the International Anti-Counter Trafficking in Terrorism or Counterterrorism Financing and Anti-Money Laundering regulations. They must also prevent uses for certain types of purchases. So they have been automatically deputized not only in the global war on drugs, the global war on some drugs that are not made by multi-billion pharmaceuticals. They also have to be included in the global war on whatever the hell we're fighting now, which includes currency wars and trade wars. And, is China an ally or an enemy this year? And whatever other wars are being fought. So they cannot be neutral. They cannot be censorship resistant. In fact, censorship is a legal mandate that they must fulfill or they get shut down. They cannot be open and public because you can't build any applications that connect to them without permission to build those applications, if they ever give permission to anyone, because they have to follow all of these rules. Therefore, they're not any of the things that we care about. So how do they compete exactly with the open, public, borderless, neutral, censorship-resistant, transparent, immutable cryptocurrencies that we're talking about? They don't. And they don't because they serve a different purpose. They serve the purpose of giving easier financing to those who are already banked, to those who are already identified, to those who already have the means to participate in global finance and identify themselves to the regulated authorities, to those who have the privilege of financial inclusion. They're banking for the already included. They cannot offer banking to the already excluded, by definition. So who is crypto for? Crypto is for the other 6 billion, the ones they can't serve. They can serve the 2 billion. They're customers who really already have a bank account. Now, if you're a bank, you should be terrified by this, because now you're getting attacked from two fronts. Crypto is coming to serve all of the people you've left behind and fulfill the idea of universal basic financial services for all. And on the other hand, the fundamental advantage that banks have and what differentiates them and the way they compete is by being excellent at technology. Well, guess what? There's some new players in town and they're better at it than you. And they're better at technology and they're better at user experience. And they've also mastered using artificial intelligence to tickle the dopamine receptors of 2 billion people and fool them into taking terrible decisions and participating in surveillance capitalism. They do surveillance capitalism better than you. They're more rich, more powerful, and more sophisticated when it comes to building user experience than you. So if you're a bank, you should be terrified of global coin. Absolutely terrified, because that's only the first one. Here comes Apple, Google, and every other tech company. Software is coming to eat the banking industry, and it's coming from both directions simultaneously. The highly permissioned but more polished and more sophisticated technology on one end, and the completely permissionless, the one that doesn't have to play by your rules, that can compete outside the sandbox that you've carved out and serve all of the people you've left outside. And banking in the middle just gets squeezed to nothing.
Wow, I'm speechless. I don't even know what to say after that. That was absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
Feels like that extra should go in every highlight reel. I'm blown away. If you don't mind, just one last question, because it gave me another idea. Because you're always talking about financial inclusion, universal access, equal access to all, and it's a beautiful message. And a lot of people tend to talk about how utility tokens has no value. It's just thin air. Multi-utility tokens as well. And everyone's talking about the rise of security tokens. Harari in his book was talking about in Sapiens that securities or companies do not exist. If a company goes bust, the car still exists. They're not connected, like you were talking about the Greek philosophers earlier. Do you feel like security tokens is kind of a step back in that direction and utility tokens is just misunderstood, or is there value to both? What is your overall view on?
I think security tokens are kind of a weak compromise, because what they're trying to do is do something that is a bit more sophisticated than traditional securities, a bit more fluid, a bit more liquid, a bit more flexible, with a few more capabilities, but neglecting the power of completely open global utility and security tokens that are not the regulated type that is only available to accredited investors. To me, the real promise of things like crowdfunding and open public offerings like ICOs, which are not regulated, today, 99.9% of them are scams. We understand that, and investors should be very careful about these things. But we also have to realize that the possibility of taking any startup anywhere in the world that has a powerful idea, execution team, etc., and connecting it to a pool of investors from anywhere in the world, that is enormously powerful. That's going to revolutionize the funding of new technologies and new ventures. Democratizing access to investment is, again, another very powerful tool in reducing poverty. Again, it's about economic inclusion. We talk about the unbanked, but banking is only one aspect of economic inclusion. Access to investment opportunities is one of the big things that separate and create more inequality and separate the haves from the have-nots, right? So if you live in certain countries where you have very limited access to financial services, you also have very limited access to investment opportunities. Even in the United States, in order to invest in private equity rounds, for example, you have to be an accredited investor. You have to show that you have more than $200,000 of repeated annual income for 3 years in a row, I think, or more than $1 million in liquid assets, not counting your primary residence, right? Well, how many people have that? I can tell you, it's a very, very small number. So having, that level of privilege gives you the ability to buy into things before they become listed on the stock exchange, get in the early rounds, participate in investments most mortals don't get to. And that actually is an opportunity that creates multiples of growth and gain to those who participate, and losses, of course. You have to be very careful about these things. The idea is that accredited investors have less to lose, perhaps, because they have more money, or they're more sophisticated because they have more money. What an incredibly bourgeois concept, right? That's almost like saying the masses are not educated enough to vote. Oh, wait, that was said for centuries, right? So the idea that the masses are not educated enough to invest, well, guess why? Because you won't let them invest. Let them invest and they gain the education through need to learn how to make better investments every time they try. And it's all a matter of relative wealth. Wealth is not an absolute thing. If you have a tiny bit of disposable income, a fraction of disposable income of someone who's an accredited investor, you need access to better investment opportunities more than the rich person. Putting people in a poverty trap because we believe that we know better, it's patronizing, right? And not just patronizing, ultimately it's immoral. Condemning people to poverty by not giving them opportunities to participate in the world economy. So one of the really interesting things about the completely open world of tokens is that it can connect any investor to any opportunity anywhere in the world. And regulators cannot stop that from happening. And the reason they can't stop that from happening is because every regulator operates within one jurisdiction. American regulators think that the entire globe is their jurisdiction and they're going to extend their arm. All they're doing is they're teaching the people who are involved in this, especially the scammers, to create layers of obfuscation so they can escape prosecution. But the bottom line is they're also stopping very, very interesting ideas and interesting and good investments from having a level playing field, from being able to act the way American companies do that have much more opportunity. There's this enormous gap between the organic funding of early stage angel investors, venture capital, and stock market funding. And most companies find it very difficult because the pipeline narrows tremendously. And so it's not just about investors accessing investment opportunities, it's also about companies accessing capital. Now imagine if you're a brilliant young engineer and you live in the Philippines. Not your fault, you were born there. Great, you have a fantastic idea, an idea that is worthy of the best backing by the most sophisticated investors in the world. You cannot get to them. You cannot get to them. Even if you manage to fly across and land in Silicon Valley and pitch your hat with all of the other people, almost impossible, right? And the regulatory barriers to even incorporating a company in many of the developing countries are so high. Imagine how that changes if all that matters is the idea and your ability to execute, not where you are. So we are going to create a new environment that's going to massively disrupt and also liberate possibilities for investment. And I think that's a good thing. We shouldn't be scared of that. We don't need to regulate this with committees. We can regulate this with programmable structures. We can build reputation systems that regulate. Decentralized systems that exist on a global basis need to be regulated by decentralized systems that exist on a global basis. You have a problem with reputation, build a decentralized reputation system to help us with that. You need vetting, great, decentralized vetting. You need whatever kind of consumer protection, programmable consumer protection with smart contracts. We solve the problems of decentralized global computing with solutions that are based on decentralized global computing. We don't solve them by saying, hang on a second, we'll just call these 12 dudes in New York who work on a committee of extreme importance and authority and ask them if what you're doing is okay. They already have enough power, right? We don't need that anymore. They democratize the function of banking and turn it into an app that everyone can access without vetting because they've already pre-vetted. They have agreed to download the software that follows the rules of consensus, and that is the only vetting required in these systems. But we shouldn't allow that. We did. But we can't have people make anonymous transactions. They will. But we must regulate this. You can't. And you won't. Because 6 billion people need this. And you have neither the moral authority, nor, more importantly, the practical capability to stand in their way, or even to stand in the way of what is going to be the greatest revolution in financial services in 3 centuries, universal access to basic finance. Thank you.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think, like, for example, the Ethereum ICO, where at that time, I believe it was 134 countries could have participated in a project.
Yeah.
A really cool project with lots of engineers backing up, working on this digital infrastructure. Like you said, it's inclusion. It's really giving equal opportunity to everyone.
A lot of those projects, because they have a physical presence in Western nations, have to exclude all of the citizens of Iran and Venezuela and North Korea and this, that, and the other, whoever is on the naughty list today, right?
That's true, yeah.
You know, countries like Saudi Arabia. Oh wait, they're not on the naughty list. They're one of our distinguished and esteemed allies. That's fucked up. Yeah. Is the bottom line with that, right?
That is fucked up. My dad is in Iran, by the way.
Yes. And was that his choice?
No.
No, exactly. Exactly.
Andreas, this has been amazing. I feel like I'm going to watch this interview over and over and over. And I hope, many of the people out there will also understand the 5 pillars and all the great work you've done up to now. A lot of people say that mastering Bitcoin is actually, I've heard so many different terms, but saying that it's basically a gem. I've heard gem. I've heard the Bible for Bitcoin. I've heard so many terms talking about what great work you've done and all the talks you've been giving over the past. Yeah, thank you so much for helping this space.
And it's a collaborative and ongoing project. You've got to realize that, first of all, it's available open source on GitHub, and it was developed collaboratively and under open source licenses. It's been translated by more than 800 volunteers into 17 languages right now. And that effort continues with a second edition that was opened for Creative Commons attribution share-alike licenses in November. The effort is ongoing. Spanish is about 75% done. Many of the other languages are just starting. You can actually go and help with that effort and bring it to the language of your country, and even self-publish it because it's a completely open license. But keep in mind, books can never be perfect and they can never be finished. This is not the work of one person. This is the work and the reflection of a whole community. I was like the maestro, conducting the orchestra, helping coordinate everybody. And I wrote big chunks of it, but I didn't write all of it, and I didn't do it alone. These are community efforts. My other books are also available. This is really for developers and technically minded people. It's about what Bitcoin is and how it works. And similarly, I've written about Ethereum and mastering Ethereum. For people who are non-technical, The Internet of Money, this is volume 2, which is actually my favorite volume. It's a bit more in your face, a bit more irreverent. It's a collection of 11 of my talks, as well as a Q&A. Volume 1 is another 11 talks. They're discontinuous. You can buy or read them in any sequence you want. You can just start right in the middle. And they're about why this technology matters, about the social, political, philosophical implications, the impact on the future. The non-technical, they're my talks, corrected and polished up, but in a way that's accessible to everyone. So if you want to help someone understand, or if you yourself want to understand why this technology matters, that's more your book. If you're a software engineer and you want to understand how they work and how to build things on them, then more the Mastering
Bitcoin or Mastering
series.
Ethereum
Yes,
series.
that's correct.
That's really, really cool. So my grandma Suzie would understand this?
I don't know if she'd understand all of it, but she'd understand enough to understand that what kind of impact this will have. Most importantly, she'd enjoy reading it, I think. This has a very broad audience. I'll tell you a little dirty secret, which is someone asked me, what is your goal with this book when I first started it? And I said, I want this to be the perfect toilet book. And one of the reasons it is a great toilet book is because each chapter is 3 or 4 pages, and you can read it in 7 to 10 minutes, which, guess what, is exactly the right amount of time you need. And you can start anywhere and end anywhere you want without having to follow a plot or a narrative. They're all standalone little chapters. So what I encourage people to do is give it as a gift and have people put it in their bathroom. And yeah.
Was that deliberate?
It was absolutely deliberate. I just said, make it a perfect toilet book. I want it to be, the kind of thing you read when you're at your most vulnerable and ready for new ideas.
That is brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Andreas. It was absolutely awesome having you.
To meet you.
Definitely, guys, catch Andreas's talk at the Crypto Compare Digital Asset Summit. It was a talk that was extremely emotional. I was blown away. I was emotional myself. So please.
Thank you so much. And thank you to you and your crew for all of the wonderful work they're doing.
We definitely want you back next time you're in London, Andreas. It'd be awesome to have a second one. And we will get more women on the show as well.
Thank you so much.
As your feedback.
All
thank
right.
you so much, buddy. Appreciate it.
Good. Thank you.
Hey, stop stealing my trading strategies. If you want to build your own trading strategies, predict, learn, and earn Bitcoin with zero risk, definitely have a look at our community app. It's tons of fun.